And that was Michael Jackson, Dirty Diana. We do love Michael Jackson. I've got Rachel Thomas on the line. Rachel, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Excellent. I'm so glad. I sometimes have a bit of trouble with these buttons here. There's so many. Now, I just want to introduce you first. You're a former veteran and member of Veterans for Peace, and you've got a degree in international law, and you worked in Namibia at a legal assistance centre where your focus was gender-based violence, and you've also spent the last 4 years working on the campaign against depleted uranium as well as environmental damage and toxic materials in conflict. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started in the military? I mean, I know you started very early. You were about 17, is that right?
Yeah, I was 17. I'd been in Army Cadets for a few years, and coming from like a place like Salford, you don't feel like there's many options open to you. And I was told I was going to go skiing and I'd see the world and I'd be paid lots of money. And at the time, I really thought that, like, you're really trained to believe the British Army is about bringing justice to the world. I've learned a lot different since.
So what was your experience when you were in the military? Did you personally experience any sort of bullying or abuse?
So where I was at the Army Apprentice College, and you have to be under 18 to go there. And they're looking for people with higher GCSE grades. And yeah, we saw a lot of bullying on the camp, but a lot, like, the main concern of mine now, especially looking back at it with older eyes, is a lot of our male members of staff who were in their 30s, who were there to look after us, were actually sleeping with the 16-year-old girls in their care.
Yeah, that's disgusting. And so, I mean, obviously, I mean, how... This is actually, I mean, we know that the military have a great deal of faults, and ideally, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have a military at all. Or they would be more of a sort of humanitarian cause.
Yeah, I think so. Countries like Costa Rica managed not to have a military. And people always say, oh, it's for defence. And actually, when was the last time Britain actually got attacked?
Yeah,
We're one of the most aggressive militaries in the world for continuously attacking people or funding militias in other countries. Yeah.
I've got this theory that I mean, it's probably a bit out there, but I've got this theory that the 20th century has been designed in such a way as to make us believe that we're the good guys when in fact we are the bad guys.
Yeah, not just. I don't think it's like just an actual design. Like, I think it's neoliberalism, it's imperialism. We're taught that, oh well, obviously as white people we're better than all these people, and we're going to bring them peace and justice, and they couldn't have done it without us. And it's like, well, actually, if you look at the people taking the mineral wealth from all of these countries who are causing the wars, who are funding the different militia groups in each country, we're usually right up there with America.
Yeah, I mean, the war, the atrocities in war. I mean, how does this happen? As a society, in your experience, how does society not know that this is going on, considering how enormous it is?
I think you have to look to our government and to our media. We have one of the most a study just came out, actually, that we've got one of the most right-wing medias in Europe. And you see it day by day, and you see this, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, oh, look at these poor African people, or look at these poor people here.
False piety.
And they're savage, and you look at the clever use of language that is used, and obviously we're nothing like that, and we never have been. And it makes it, and you see them setting the case for war time and time again.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a show a few weeks ago when I talked about the emergence of the likes of people like George Soros, who are funding a lot of these people movement programs around the world, mass migration and all this. A lot of the countries that these refugees and immigrants are running away from, these war-torn countries, the leaders of those countries have their funding and their backing from sources, powerful sources that can be traced back to Europe and the West.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I actually spent a few weeks last year working on the border of Serbia and Macedonia with refugees.
Wow.
And it's just like, it's one of the most overwhelming things I've ever done. I was watching 10,000 people per day come through this tiny little town in Serbia, and you just realise Europe is going to change.
Do you think that this, I mean, when you see that level of people movement and people coming in, is it right to call this some sort of an invasion?
I think that's, if you look, this is the language that the media use to dehumanise people. The people I met there were the most beautiful, amazing people. They were. I'd give somebody a cup of tea, and they were so so grateful. And it's like, mate, I just gave you a cup of tea.
Yeah.
You're going through hell. And I think what people aren't realising about what's going on with Syria is the people that are leaving are the people that can afford to leave. So I met doctors, lawyers,
Wow.
I met these humanitarian workers, people who'd worked for people like Médecins Sans Frontières. They're the people who've got money. It's the middle classes who are leaving, the educated middle classes. Poor people are still left in Syria. And these people did not want to leave their home.
Dare I touch on the subject of the British secret services and the shady fringe elements of these alphabet agencies around the world, training, arming and funding terrorists in these regions, which are leading to these conflicts that then goes on to give the West the excuse to go in there and sort it all out and set up our own people?
I think, we play both sides at all the times as well. I'm not sure if I couldn't say for certain there's a big conspiracy, but even if you look at Saudi Arabia, we have constantly been selling them arms. We go and train their armies. They come here, they use Sandhurst. And then now we're watching the atrocities that are happening in Yemen, and we've seen it now that British military advisors are there with Saudi Arabia, helping them during this massive humanitarian crisis and massive breach of human rights.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It's like whatever happened to peace and togetherness? It was as if we were working towards, from the 80s and the 90s. I remember when I was a kid thinking, thank goodness the Second World War happened way back when. We'll never see anything like that ever again. Thank goodness I'm born at this time because, we're in those days, it looked like we were heading down, not perfectly, but we were generally heading towards peace. The Berlin Wall was demolished and removed. The Iron Curtain, between the former Soviet Union and the West, that figuratively came down, and there was more open communications, and it was looking like we're all emerging. The EU started to emerge and trade, and all these new countries that can interact with each other. Now all of a sudden it's like, deal's off. We're going to war. I
think it's actually one. It's a bit of a myth that before the 80s. After the Second World War, we haven't been at war. Actually, we've been at war every single day. I think it's something like less than 20 days we've not been at war since the Second World War. And that was actually a war between capitalism and communism, and we were funding militia. Well, we know America funded militia in Nicaragua to like a military coup to overthrow left-wing government. You look at the Vietnam War, and the UK has been doing hideous stuff, especially in Southeast Asia and Asia. Like we were actually the first people to use Agent Orange, not the Americas.
Well, they do say that since the War of Independence in the US in 1776, that out of 240 years, 228 years of that they've been at war.
It's like 12
I think
years. We've seen a massive increase in it since the 80s. Because we had the neoliberal economics of the, they call it Reaganomics, which was Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Actually removing all of the statutory legislation that held corporations back. And now we're in this massive state of affairs. If you look at TTIP's like the scariest thing I can think of. But corporations have slowly been eroding like government power. I wouldn't say we've ever lived in a proper democracy. But slowly now corporations have become more powerful than states. And if you look at war's about money. It's always about getting in to steal the natural resources from a country. It's about the sale of the weapons, the sale of the bombs. It's big business.
It's just incredible. And it's interesting that one government after another seems to have the same mandates.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, it's why I think we don't live in a democracy, because this is the corporate power that's had. Because you can only win an election if you've been given the money, and where does the money come from? It comes from corporations and the big backers.
And this is a big reflection of humanity as well, because it's sort of like a popularity contest, and unbelievably, even now, I know people who are talking about the US elections as if, look, Bernie Sanders and, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. I'm like, just stop it. Stop plugging in to that weird reality.
Yeah, and I think we also need to look at the systemic problems that we have. Like the systemic problems that are what cause wars. It's poverty, there's racism, all this talk about immigration. We've actually built Fortress Europe. We've blocked off this amazing travel route that used to happen actually between Africa and Europe, which brought a lot of art and a lot of shared cultural experiences. And the problems do come down to that we've got a system that is broken, but yet every 4 or 5 years we can go and put a tick in a box and vote for something that might be a little less or better.
Yes, because I think it's the response. People aren't, I don't think, willing to take personal responsibility. They're looking to, and this is a part of the fault, like the fault of the general public, is they're looking for somebody else to take control and make decisions so they can just get about their little lives and their workaday worlds and go, that's it, it's all taken care of, someone else is looking after that. But we can't afford to play that game anymore. We personally need to start taking responsibility for this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, like, you see a lot of people go, oh, this is wrong, somebody should do something about it. And you're like, you need to do something about it. You've got to stop looking to governments or to big organisations to do something. Collectively, we actually have a lot of power. But people are but it's also, again, a systemic problem. People are so worried about paying their mortgage, paying their bills. You're told by the media that anybody who goes on a protest is a weirdo.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. I wonder what protests really do. You know, there's so many people have protested over the years, and yet we've seen not a great deal of actual action that's positive action that's come. I mean, you know, protesting's great, and the people voice their opinion, but it seems to me like the governments of the world have gone rogue.
Yeah, I think you only have to look at 2 million people marching against the Iraq war and being ignored to realise that just one protest on its own isn't going to change anything. And one line I've been saying to people recently is, stop asking for change and start creating the change.
Yeah.
But that comes from people needing to feel empowered, feel educated enough to go and do something about it, and it is quite difficult.
Well, it's very confusing, I think, as well. I mean, look at all these different splinter groups and factions that have come out of the Middle East. You just get to the point where your eyes are rolling in your head and you're like, I can't keep up with this. And I actually think that's deliberate. I think that's part of this. I mean, I am a bit of a conspiracy nut, I'm sure you can probably tell. But I think part of this is a part of some sort of geopolitical Jedi mind trick, where it's sort of like they have this constant rolling course of events, like a movie before our eyes. I mean, I remember back to the 1980s, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and Yasser Arafat. Whatever happened to that? You know, and this just rolls on. The next one comes along, and then another one comes along, and another one, and there's a splinter group, and now there's this group over here, and now this country's up to something, and it gets to the point where your head is so full of these different things that people just switch off.
Yeah, I don't think it's unusual for stuff like that to happen. I think you've got to look at what we've done over the past 20 years, which is the vilification of a whole religion, which has then been put onto a whole geopolitical area. And if you look even within any sort of organising, groups are always going to split and break. But what we should be asking is, where are they getting the money from? Where are they getting the weapons from?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Why do they want to do it? I think we never ask this question. Why did the IRA want to come and blow up the UK and to blow up people? Why do people do that? It's because you're oppressing people, and the only way they know to fight back is exactly how you fought them, which is with violence.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, do you think that this could possibly... I mean, I think the world is going through this huge, big change. Like, we're in the midst of this massive, big shift in consciousness, and people are taking personal responsibility, and they do see them, that people are more and more seeing themselves as empowered, and one by one they're coming out going, hey, you know, I'm not going along with this, I'll do my bit, you know. And even if you die knowing that you just did your one little bit, I'm fine with that. As long as I know I did my bit, I'm happy with that. But do you think that this could be a part of a teething process and the emergence of a new global community?
I'm hoping so. I think, like, one thing that I wrote about in my dissertation on international law was, as globalization is affecting human rights, as corporations being able to move their businesses to countries where they have less legislation, one thing we have had is the advent of social media and the internet, so we can share stories. So we know minutes within it happening that something's happened in Bangladesh or in Kenya. We know straight away, and people can put pressure on. I'm also part of the anti-fracking movement, and we're seeing an amazing just amount of people who have never been on a protest before in their lives, and now, like, they spend half their time fighting fracking in their communities and working together as groups. So I just try and remain hopeful that, that at some point we'll hit that tipping point and people become more powerful again.
Yeah, and I think it's an indication of the human psyche that it takes the worst case scenario. It takes looking down the barrel before we go, oh, I think I might need to do something about this.
Yeah, I think that's true. And if you look at any massive social change throughout history, there's usually been a cataclysm. So if you look at human rights legislation came from the Second World War, when we saw the worst atrocities that we could ever imagine. But so did women's rights. And I think it takes that massive change and that massive shift that's out of your control for people to realise that there's more they can do.
Now, you're campaigning against depleted uranium at the moment. Is that right?
I was up until a couple of months ago. Our funding got cut.
Oh.
I have done for the past 4 years.
All right, and as well as environmental damage and toxic materials in conflict. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so depleted uranium, it's a byproduct of the nuclear industry. And what they discovered with it was really dense.
Right.
And it was during the arms race with Russia, so they decided to try it out as tank-busting munition. The problem with it, it's still radioactive and it's also chemically toxic. And when it hits a tank, it aerosols, so there's like tiny little particles that are breathable, and that's where the problems come once it gets inside your body. It can mutate your DNA, it can cause birth defects, cause cancer, and we used a lot of it in Iraq. We used it in the Balkans and we've used it in Iraq, but also there's other toxins in Iraq. If you look at the oil fires, America burn all their leftover munitions.
Yeah.
Like Iraq's like basically one of the most toxic places on the planet now, and that's why we've seen this massive rise in birth defects and cancers.
Yeah. It's incredible, isn't it? And I mean, is that deliberate? Is that actually a part of the purpose of these weapons to actually become like an aerosol type weapon, like a weaponized aerosol, and breathe it in? Is that a part of it? Do they want that to happen?
I don't think it is. I don't think they're that vindictive. The aerosol comes because it self-sharpens, which is why they say like there was this necessity for the armed forces to have the best weapon that they could have. But that means that they've put the humanitarian consequences below what we call the military utility, whereas the humanitarian consequences under the Geneva Convention should always be the primary concern.
Yes, well, it's interesting, isn't it? There's all these conventions and laws and human rights and employment rights and civil rights and all the rest of these things, but it just seems like humanity's getting a bit of a kick in the arse at the moment.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to this neoliberalism. We're told that trickle-down economics is what's going to help, and actually what it's doing is putting more money and more power and wealth into what we call basically a global elite, the 1%. There was even a book written by, I forgot his name now, a French economist, said capitalism actually doesn't do what it says on the tin. It is causing all of the money and power to be concentrated within this global elite, and nothing within capitalism can change.
It's interesting. I talk about language a lot. I talk about languaging a lot. And when they use this terminology and phrases where they say things like, this is going to be good for everyone, and then the middle class disappears.
Yeah.
And they wind up with all the money and wealth, and then the poverty is just expanding beyond comprehension at the moment. I can't believe how many homeless people are here in Manchester. They're just they're like breeding.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think actually one of the most inspiring things that's happened in Manchester recently is some people started helping homeless people set up camps. And it was like the council have spent more on evicting the camps than they have tried to in housing people. But now what's happened is that homeless people have got together and have started fighting for themselves and fighting for their own rights, and it's been really inspiring to watch.
Well, that's amazing. What are they doing?
They're opening like old buildings and letting people sleep in there, and like they're having a vegan kitchen.
Wow.
People are brought in counselling. They actually squatted Gary Neville's hotel before he's just bought a building to turn into a hotel. And he actually let them stay, whereas all the other buildings are going and getting orders to have them removed. Gary Neville let them stay over the winter and is actually helping to rehome people. But like all of this, and now even the council are going, we'll help with this as well. We'll open old buildings. Yeah. And that is that people getting together and realising they can do something.
I think an important tool to help the whole process along is to sort of shame those people in positions of power, like to actually highlight their shortfalls in trying to push other people down.
Yeah, I always thought that, and then until I've seen this latest Tory government where they just really don't care.
Yeah.
We can say whatever we want about them. They'll just carry on cutting the NHS. They'll carry on with the failed austerity project.
failed everything. They're shameless.
Yeah.
They can't be shamed.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there.
As much as we might try, I'd try to shame them. Now, I just wanted to touch on something else here. Oh gosh, time flies. They're talking about opening up the investigation into the deep cut killings. Have you heard of this?
I have, yeah.
Deep cut barracks. I thought you would have. Now, there was 4 young recruits who were found dead from gunshot wounds, including one young recruit, Sean Benton, who was found with 5 gunshot wounds to his chest, and the verdict, unbelievably, was suicide. How can this happen?
I've always wondered. Now, I'm no weapons expert,
Yeah.
but I do remember a lot from my military training of using weapons, and I always figured it'd be pretty impossible to do that.
It's
to be able to
unthinkable.
hold the weapon, which the trigger is quite far away from you if you're pointing it at your chest,
But 5 times.
and be able to fire 5 rounds.
I mean, this is... my head does not compute that information.
Even if you had it on burst, the burst was bursts of 3. Well, you can have a rapid fire, but I just don't understand how it wouldn't have even slipped and be firing elsewhere before 5 shots got into him.
So I guess the long and the short of it is they're looking at opening up this inquest again, and they keep talking about opening up this inquest again, but it's been essentially 20 years all in all since one of the first ones, a young lady who was killed, and she was talking about the bullying and sexual abuse in the military, and then they claimed that she had committed suicide, which is all very convenient, that the person making these claims suddenly turns up dead and they can't make their claims anymore.
Yeah, it does. It's a very strange one, because I have known where women have made complaints, and generally there is a lot of bullying. You know that you're not going to be taken seriously. It's very difficult for women to come forward, and once they have, they know their career is ruined. I've never seen the case where people have been killed for it, but it makes you wonder what was going on at Deep Cut at that time, and why it's taken 20 years to get an inquiry.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is happening all around the world. Even in Australia, we've got cases like this where unusual suicides and claims and this sensation of something very sinister is happening. There was a lot of accusations made about the Holsworthy base just outside of in Sydney, actually, just outside of Sydney there, and I mean there's so much going on in America as well, these sorts of things: raping, suicides, unusual deaths, this incredible toxic behaviour, and yet these same people are entrusted to go to other countries. I think, as Ben Griffin, he was saying that in the military they're taught to see even their own people as the lowest of the low, so how would they view other people from other countries?
Yeah, exactly. And people say, oh, it's just this one barracks. It's not. It's the whole culture of the military. It's a very bullying, very top-down culture.
Yeah.
And it does, yeah. And when you do look at even in training, we were taught to call people from Iraq ragheads. And when you're shooting at silhouettes of German soldiers. It's all about dehumanising the people that you're going to fight against. And modern warfare is totally different to what it used to be. There's no front line anymore. The fighting occurs in civilian areas. The majority of deaths in conflict now are civilians. So that means our soldiers are constantly coming up against civilians. And what are they doing?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the personality of war has changed, and people out there. This is why I was saying it's as if people seem to think they think war, and they think Second World War. They think battlefields, they think trenches, they think front line, they think tanks and things blowing up. When really, what war is these days is more urban areas and highly trained professional killers interacting with untrained, unarmed civilian people in a suburban, urban environment.
Yeah, and aerial bombing and drones.
Yeah.
It's all even more dehumanising they're going, oh, well, because they know it's bad news if soldiers from home get killed. They're now looking at ways they don't have to send as many soldiers to be killed. That means you're killing a lot more civilians. And again, that's putting the military, what they call the military utility, above the humanitarian impact.
As well as I think they call them soccer ball. What do they call them? Soccer mum killers in America. These women or people who get on the drone like consoles. They're like a computer. They're like a game. They're like sitting in a game arcade and pressing buttons and moving little things around. And emotionally, they're completely removed from the situation. So they have no emotional accountability for the fact that they just destroyed an entire village.
Yeah, and like they're actually going after computer gamers and recruiting computer gamers for it now. But one thing that is coming out is actually a lot of drone operators are now getting PTSD. They're suffering the psychological effects of what they've done. But it means at the time they can be much more tyrannical because they're not seeing what they're doing. It affects them later. But what difference does that make to all the civilians and their families who've been killed?
It's just destruction. It's destruction on both sides. I mean, how many soldiers, and I've got to start to wind this up because time flies so fast, but it's just such destruction on both sides. It's not only getting these young men and women into the military and blinding them with all this wonder and glory, so-called glory of war, and getting them to do things that they wind up regretting for the rest of their lives. So not only have they destroyed other people's lives, but they've actually destroyed their own life as well.
Yeah, and I think this again comes from having this elite who, it's not them that are going off to war. If you look at now, they're using austerity, but then they're putting a lot more resources into recruiting people from poor backgrounds. They're coming to places like Salford. We just saw in Scotland they were going to try and put army cadets in all of the schools. And it's about them not really caring about that either. And if you look, especially in the last 20 years, the number of army charities that have happened, from Help to Heroes, the PTSD charities, they're allowing the public then to take up the cost of looking after the people that they've destroyed.
Incredible. It's a big destructive cycle, and we have to, each of us, put in our best effort to try to diminish the violence and bring awareness to this around the world. Do you have a website that you can recommend to the listeners for them to get some more information on how they can inform themselves about what the hell is actually happening here?
Well, if they want to learn more about Veterans for Peace and what we do, it's veteransforpeace.org.uk. I'm just trying to think what else. I use a number of sources. I'd say look at more independent blogs. There's a thing called Real Media, another one called The Canary, and they try and report away from the mainstream media. And I'm also part of a group called Reclaim the Power, which is reclaimthepower.org.uk.
Cool.
And that is about taking action, like direct action on social, economic and environmental justice.
Excellent. All right, Rachel, thanks for coming on the show.
All right, thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. I've had a really good time. Time just flies. I looked up and went, oh, my God, it's just like 25 minutes. Oh, my God. Okay, thank you so much, and all the best with that, and I'll keep in touch with you as well.
All right, thank you. Yeah, definitely keep in touch. Thanks.
Okay, take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye. That was the wonderful Rachel Thomas. She works with Veterans for Peace, a fascinating woman, incredible person, and I really highly recommend that if you haven't gone and looked at anything done by these returned veterans and the Veterans for Peace organisation, then I highly recommend you get online, look at YouTube, and do what you got to do. Inform yourself, folks. We're going into a big time now in the history of our planet. It's not to be underestimated, and at this stage of the game, I think it's really important that every single one of us make our every single effort that we possibly can to bring peace to this planet and say no, absolutely say no, and no again to anyone in any claimed position of power that tells you to hurt another person. Say no. This is James Brown, I Got You.